show. Before we kick off with Jennifer Lawless, the big news just broken by GoLocal Prav. You can read online. Noted architect Friedrich St. Florian just endorsed the Fein Tower. Now, this is before the City Plan Commission meets in 45 minutes. We have all of that, his reasons for endorsing the tower on GoLocal Prav right now. But I'd like to welcome my first guest into the studio here, Jennifer Lawless down at American University. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello.
It's good to have you back, as you were just in town last night for an event here in Rhode Island, but we'll catch you back inside the Beltway with everything that's taking place there, because one of the big stories today happens to be about the First Lady and her health. A lot of press attention to it. It said minor surgery, but really the first time that we've seen the First Lady, I believe they said since Nancy Reagan, with a hospital stay of this duration. What's the latest, and why does it matter?
Well, I think it matters because we know very little about Melania Trump in the first place. She's incredibly private, and she was apparently able to get to Walter Reed, have diagnostic testing, and then ultimately have the surgery without anybody knowing that. And that's pretty remarkable. So I think right off the bat, that makes it somewhat interesting, and it's newsworthy because she's the First Lady. But what's particularly interesting to a lot of people here is this general sense that, wait, they're not telling us everything that we need to know. And there have been medical professionals on all of the networks talking for the last 24 hours about how if this is just a benign kidney condition, it doesn't make sense that she's in the hospital for a week. And all of the things that would require a hospital stay of 4 or 5 days are far more serious. And so there seems to be this sense that there's something more going on. And the White House is certainly not shedding light on that. Now, under ordinary circumstances, I'm not sure that in and of itself would be as much of a story, but it's sort of the same way that this administration treats everything else. They sort of roll out information on a basis that makes sense to them, but not necessarily anybody else.
Well, a couple of potential storylines here. One is that potentially, clearly if the administration doesn't want to share the information, they're not sharing the information. If it is, in fact, a private matter, should the public be privy to just exactly what it is? Is that something the public deserves to know, or does the First Lady get a certain degree of privacy?
I think she gets a certain degree of privacy, and frankly, she's entitled to that. But I also think that you've got to be careful when you're an administration that is always seen as covering things up or not necessarily telling information, conveying information in a way that makes a lot of sense. And so, as a result, if they would have just been a little bit more straightforward about what this condition actually is, I think that would have been the end of the story. But because they've been somewhat vague and the hospital stay doesn't map onto the vague description they've offered, there's this sense that they're trying to pull a fast one on us, even if they're not, and they're just trying to protect her privacy.
Do we have latest numbers of the First Lady's approval ratings versus those of her husband's?
On average, they're about 20 points higher than her husband's, and it's particularly glaring among Democrats. So a majority of Democratic women, or 45% of Democratic women, generally have a favorable impression of her. And some analyses that I've looked at have indicated that it's the women who are particularly turned off by Donald Trump that are most likely to like her, perhaps because there's this sympathy factor involved. And it's like, oh my gosh, you've got to spend your life with this man. We like you simply for getting up in the morning.
Well, all eyes again on the health of the First Lady, again, inside the Beltway, but a little further outside the Beltway, let's talk about the continued unrest in the Gaza Strip. With the establishment of the new embassy, was this expected?
I think it was probably expected, but there were a lot of people that were hopeful that it would not happen. I'm not sure that people were expecting 60 casualties, including an 8-month-old. I'm not sure that people were envisioning the kinds of graphic images that they saw. And it doesn't look like there's going to be an obvious end in sight, because the United States and Israel are very opposed in position to what a lot of our European allies have said, which is that this was Israel's fault. So, it's unclear exactly how we move forward. But I think it would be naive to believe that the administration wasn't well aware of the fact that this could very well be a consequence of moving the embassy.
And of course, a lot of Israelis, and obviously supportive of the move to Jerusalem, clearly here in the United States, energized the base of Donald Trump, the Jewish voters. But let's talk a little bit. If this gets protracted, does this become a major issue for the Trump administration?
Well, I think it becomes a major issue for the Trump administration in that he's not in a position where he wants to be the president that created additional unrest in an already heavily volatile location. And when he was warned time and again by lots of different people from different previous administrations and with different areas of expertise that the reason the embassy had not been moved to Jerusalem prior to now was because of these concerns, he kind of turned a deaf ear. So I think there are going to be pretty broad international consequences. Even if he's able to placate his base with this, there is a global community and there are global consequences that I would hope ultimately the administration will realize are more important than what fires up his base.
So let's tack a little bit towards, as we continue to do so, the midterms, and look, before we go to the elections of today. North Korea looks like there might be some hesitancy just breaking this afternoon. Let's talk about that. What had looked like a win with the brokerage of the peace between North and South Korea. North Koreans indicating today that this summit could be on hold, that this is due to the U.S. conducting, as it annually does, military exercises with South Korea.
I've been pretty, I've been pretty sort of sanguine about the prospects of there being this deal, because even as early as Saturday or Sunday of this past week, you had people from the Trump administration saying, well, a lot of T's need to be crossed and I's need to be dotted. This was only the first step. Let's not get crazy. We're still many, many stages away from this. When you've got the president proclaiming that there's now peace in North Korea and the country's been unified. So I think both sides have been very clear about there being lots of contingencies and lots of options for both sides to seem like they've been trying to make progress and move forward, but have an opportunity to back out. And today was just the first time that the North Koreans, expressed that. We've had high-level elected officials saying that now for the last 96 hours.
Well, it seems interesting. There were such high hopes with North and South Korea, and folks saying, oh, Trump could really be the person who was responsible for all of this. So I think there might have been the public perception or reaction that we were sort of going down a slope. Now, we did talk with Professor Terry Rohrig at the Naval War College, and he put the brakes on pretty quickly. Was it just sort of that media catch-up, do you think, that maybe set some lofty expectations for the United States to think, oh, well, we're just a step away from denuclearization, considering what had happened, and then now reality is really setting in?
I think that's right, but I don't blame only the media who were sort of excited about this idea. It's also the administration itself. When you've got the president and his surrogates saying, look, we've done what no previous administration has done, and we're brokering a peace deal, Americans are supposed to believe that. You're supposed to believe the news that's coming from the White House, especially when it has to do with international affairs and foreign policy.
Let's talk a little bit, some elections today around the country. What are we watching?
I lost you.
Today's political activity, what are we keeping an eye on around the country today?
So there are 4 pretty sleepy states that have midterm elections today. The only one that's at all exciting is Pennsylvania. There are a couple of districts where there are opportunities to sort of gauge how competitive some of these new districts will be heading into November. But the other states are kind of boring. Oregon, Nebraska, there's only one competitive congressional district there, and that will be in the general election, not even the primary. So this is not the kind of night that people have to stay up really late.
Nothing else to really keep tabs on? Voter turnout, any sort of minutia to be cognizant of?
So as far as the elections are concerned, one thing that I do think we should be paying attention to is in these boring races, what is voter turnout? Because the reality is that there are going to be 335 pretty boring congressional races on the ticket in November. And if we're not able to gauge the excitement that people have about the national prospects of the Democrats flipping the House or not, then we might be misperceiving what the likely outcome of November would be. So I would sort of pay attention to the enthusiasm or lack of enthusiasm in what otherwise would look like a pretty boring election night.
So we'll Wednesday morning quarterback this tomorrow, and we see what took place around the country. What else are we looking at in the coming week, Jennifer? Okay, looks like we might just wrap up a little early here. I want to thank Jennifer Lawless for Skyping into the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with our next guest here in downtown Providence.